I stood alone in the cemetery, the cold wind cutting across my face as the priest said the final prayers for my wife. Her coffin was lowered into the ground, and I felt like my entire world was being buried with her. My heart was heavy, my chest tight, my eyes swollen from nights of crying. But what hurt me most that day was not just losing her. It was the fact that my parents were not there. They didn't show up. Not my father. Not my mother. Not even my younger brother. I kept glancing behind me, hoping, praying that maybe I would see them walking up the path, late but still willing to stand beside me in my darkest moment. But they never came. My wife, the woman who had stood by me through every struggle, every disappointment, every fight with my parents, was being lowered into the ground, and I was left standing there with only her family beside me. Later that evening, I found out where they were. My parents had been at my younger brother Michael's birthday party. Balloons, laughter, music. They were eating cake and singing songs while I was burying my wife. The rage that shot through my veins nearly made me collapse. I could not understand it. How could they do this to me? How could they put a birthday, something that could have been celebrated any other day, above a funeral that would never come again? I remembered when I called my mother 2 nights before the funeral. My voice was breaking as I begged her to come. She sounded distracted, almost annoyed, like I was interrupting something. She said, "Son, you know your brother's birthday is coming up. We've planned this for weeks. I can't disappoint him." I thought it was a joke at first. I laughed, nervously waiting for her to say, "Of course we'll be there. Don't be silly." But she didn't. My father didn't even bother to pick up my calls. At the graveside, I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my skin. My wife deserved better. I deserved better. How could they claim to love me, yet leave me abandoned on the worst day of my life? As I stood there, her family comforting me more than my own blood ever had, I made a promise deep inside my chest. Promise that burned like fire. If my parents had chosen my brother's birthday over my wife's funeral, then they were about to learn that choices have consequences. They thought I would swallow the pain and move on. They thought I would keep being the son who always forgave, who always begged for scraps of love and attention. But they were wrong, because from that day forward, I decided I would make them wish they had chosen differently. My name is Daniel. I am 32 years old, and until recently, I thought I had finally built a life of my own, separate from the shadow of my parents. Growing up, I was never the favorite child. That title belonged to my younger brother, Michael. He was the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. My parents praised him, spoiled him, and celebrated him at every turn. When I brought home good grades, they barely noticed. When Michael did the bare minimum, they clapped like he had moved mountains. I learned early that if I wanted my parents' love, I had to fight for scraps. I bent myself to please them, hoping one day they would see me as enough. But no matter what I did, whether it was graduating college, landing a good job, or even getting married, it was never celebrated the way Michael's smallest victories were. The only person who ever made me feel like I was enough was my wife, Rachel. She came into my life when I was at my lowest. Back then, I was working long shifts at a law firm that barely paid me anything, struggling to prove myself in a career where my father believed I would fail. Rachel was a nurse, strong and kind, with a smile that could calm even the worst storm inside me. She didn't care about my parents' approval. She loved me for who I was. When I told my parents I was marrying Rachel, they didn't even try to hide their disapproval. My mother said she was too simple. My father muttered that I could do better. Michael laughed outright, calling her plain. But I married her anyway. On our wedding day, my parents sat in the front row, stone-faced, refusing to clap when we said our vows. Rachel squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't look at them. Look at me." And so I did. For years, she stood by me as my parents ignored us. They never invited us for holidays unless Michael was hosting. They skipped our anniversary dinners, but they threw parties for Michael's smallest promotions. Every time I tried to bridge the gap, I was met with rejection. Rachel would remind me that family is not always about blood, but about who shows up for you. She showed up. Her family showed up. Mine never did. When Rachel got sick, I thought maybe my parents would finally step forward. She was diagnosed with cancer, and our world turned upside down. I remember sitting in the hospital waiting room, my hands trembling as doctors explained the treatments. I called my parents that night, voice shaking, asking them to pray for her, to be there for us. My mother's reply was cold. "That's sad, Daniel. But Michael's moving into his new house this weekend, and we promised we'd help." That was the moment something inside me started to break. For months, Rachel fought. She lost her hair, her strength, and sometimes even her smile. But she never lost her faith in me. She would tell me that I was stronger than I believed, that I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. At night, when the pain was too much, she would lean on me and whisper, "Promise me, no matter what happens, you'll keep living. Don't let them destroy you." I promised, but I didn't know how hard it would be to keep that promise. When she passed away, I felt like the ground beneath me had shattered. The woman who carried me through every storm was gone, and the only thing I wanted was for my family to stand with me in that moment of unbearable loss. But instead, they turned their backs once again. They laughed and sang at Michael's birthday party while I lowered my wife into the earth. The grief was crushing. The anger was worse. Every memory of my childhood came flooding back. The favoritism, the neglect, the countless times I swallowed my pain just to keep peace. And now, their absence at her funeral was the final proof. I had never been their priority. Michael always was. But here's the thing they didn't understand. Losing Rachel broke me, yes, but it also changed me. I was done begging for their love. I was done being silent. The boy who once fought for scraps of attention was gone. The man who remained was someone who would make them feel the weight of their choices. And so, while I grieved, I also planned. Because if my parents thought they could keep discarding me like an unwanted burden, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. A week after Rachel's funeral, I went to my parents' house. I told myself I only wanted answers. I wanted to hear them say it was a mistake, that they were sorry, that they regretted not coming. I didn't expect warmth, but I needed something, any sign that they cared. When I knocked, Michael opened the door, smiling like nothing had happened. He was still carrying the glow of his birthday celebration. The smell of cake and leftover food hit me like a slap. My wife's grave was still fresh, and here they were, living as if nothing mattered. He stepped aside, and I walked in. My parents were sitting in the living room. My father was reading the newspaper, my mother scrolling through her phone. Nobody stood up. Nobody hugged me. Nobody asked how I was holding up. Finally, I spoke. "Why weren't you there?" My voice was low, shaking, but I forced myself to meet their eyes. My mother sighed, almost irritated. "Daniel, we told you before. It was Michael's birthday. We couldn't just cancel everything for, well, for my wife's funeral." That's what she couldn't even bring herself to say. My father folded his paper, his tone sharp. "You always make everything about yourself. We did what was best for the family. Your brother needed us. You should understand that." Something snapped inside me. Best for the family? Do you even hear yourself? Rachel was my family. She stood by me when none of you did. And you abandoned me while I buried her. Michael chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "You're always so dramatic, Daniel. It was just a funeral. People do. Birthdays come once a year. You expect the whole world to stop for you." His words cut deeper than any knife. Just a funeral. Just my wife's funeral. I lost control. I grabbed him by the collar, my voice trembling with rage. "She was my life, and you sat here eating cake." My father shouted at me to let go. My mother screamed that I was embarrassing myself. Michael pushed me back, smirking, as if he enjoyed seeing me break. That look on his face, that careless arrogance, burned into me. In that moment, I realized the truth. They didn't just forget. They didn't care. They never would. To them, I would always be second to Michael. No matter what I lost, no matter how much I suffered, my pain would never matter as much as his happiness. I walked out of that house shaking, my chest heavy, my hands trembling. The grief was still there, but now something else had joined it. Fire I couldn't put out. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. They had made their choice, and now it was time for me to make mine.
Dierskelner for Gunzelgam, Navum Masti, Hill Alfresish, Sevaus Nadohdi Nordujoines, Stoffen on Woodsua Gelsmer or Sarkish, Siskabadurthnoxuaza and Natka were the map, Evi Ludenduch, here serving it surfrana or Innovate Beasilkan in the V, Scobber, Sveroxer, Siskabnit Mutzingitzel sheer from a snipe, Murzelgam near it, so I heard the Sharra, Starshroham, Manigis Dierodas near Bambo Zuish. Her Tagishnewa, singing all up so sheer from a spike, but load up Sahad Nagdish Desish, Snarf so sheer from Omer Floch, but be surround. Emakis and the Yalair Stippen making it, or Gimbias nearing at Edim, that's knit up, see beam videos and city beam out. Her Alur Sunny Dips Nilas and Sapski, Snow one, her the Rash Dirun did it, it is if Bats, Manilok Bats, so Asner Bamni that fat. My father came in, his voice cold. Stop yelling in my house. We are only trying to help you move on. You are obsessed with your grief. It's not healthy. Obsessed. That's what they called the love I had for my wife. Michael walked in then, smirking as always. Maybe you should thank us. You're free now. Rachel kept you tied down. Maybe this is your chance to finally be more than a shadow. The rage I felt was indescribable. Every word they spoke was another knife to my chest. I realized then that they weren't just blind. They wanted to erase her completely, as if she never existed, as if the years I spent with her didn't matter. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, Rachel's scarf in my hands. I felt isolated, betrayed, cut off from the people who should have been my support system. But instead of breaking me, it hardened me. I saw the truth clearer than ever. They weren't just careless. They were cruel. And Michael, he wasn't just the favorite. He was the weapon they used to keep me small, to remind me I would never matter as much. For the first time in my life, I stopped longing for their love. I stopped wishing they would change. Instead, I began to think about how to make them face what they had done. If they wanted to erase Rachel's memory, I would make sure her name echoed louder than theirs ever would. The breaking point came 3 months later. My parents invited me to a family dinner. It was the first time since the funeral that they had reached out. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part wanted to see if maybe, just maybe, they were ready to make peace. When I walked in, the table was filled with food, laughter, and chatter. Michael was there with his girlfriend, smiling like a king. My parents acted like nothing had ever happened, like Rachel's death had been erased from memory. I sat quietly, my hands clenched under the table. Halfway through the meal, Michael raised a glass and said, "To family, the only people who matter." He looked at me when he said it, smirking as if daring me to react. Couldn't hold it anymore. I slammed my fist on the table, and the room went silent. My voice shook, but it was sharp enough to cut through the air. Family? You talk about family while you threw mine away? You talk about family when you couldn't even stand by me when Rachel died. My mother rolled her eyes. "Daniel, must you bring this up again? You have to learn to let go." I stood up, my heart pounding. Let go? You want me to let go of the woman who loved me more than anyone ever did? You want me to forget the way you chose a birthday party over her funeral? No, not this time. My father's face darkened. "Sit down. You are embarrassing yourself." But I didn't sit. I had been silent my whole life and I was done. That's when the truth spilled out. My father, angry and careless, shouted, "Rachel was never good enough for you. We didn't come to her funeral because we didn't want to pretend she mattered more than she did." The words froze the air. My chest tightened, my ears rang, and the room spun. My mother tried to hush him, but it was too late. The truth had been spoken. Michael laughed cruelly, adding fuel to the fire. "He's right, Daniel. You wasted your life on her. You were always second place and you'll always be. That's why they chose me. That's why they'll always choose me." And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I realized I had been fighting for a place in their hearts that never existed. The betrayal was complete, the mask was gone. They didn't just neglect me. They despised the choices I made, despised the love I shared with Rachel, despised that I tried to live outside their shadow. I walked out that night, not as their son, not as Michael's brother, but as a man who had finally seen the truth. They had chosen him over me, and in doing so, they had lost me forever. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't leaving broken.
I was leaving with a plan, and soon they would feel the weight of every choice they had made. After that night, I stopped trying to fix what was already broken. I blocked their numbers. I stopped answering their messages. For the first time in my life, I chose silence not as surrender, but as power. At first, the quiet felt heavy. I was so used to chasing after them, begging for attention, hoping for approval. Now, I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by Rachel's things, and realized I didn't need them anymore. They had taken enough of my peace. I wasn't going to let them take the rest of my life too. I started focusing on myself. I went back to work, but this time I didn't drown myself in cases just to prove my worth. I worked with purpose. I began volunteering at the hospital where Rachel had been treated, helping families who were struggling with the same battles we faced. Somehow, standing by them made me feel closer to her. It was like keeping her spirit alive through kindness and service. One day, I organized a memorial in her name. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers came. People shared stories about how Rachel had touched their lives. As I listened, tears filled my eyes, but they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of pride. My wife was gone, but she was not forgotten. Her name echoed louder than my parents could ever silence. Meanwhile, word spread about how my parents had skipped her funeral. People whispered, judged, and slowly the perfect image they had built around themselves started to crack. Their friends pulled away. Their church community questioned them. The very respect they had tried to protect by ignoring Rachel's death began to crumble. I didn't need to lift a finger. Their own choices became their punishment. For me, the healing came slowly. Nights were still hard, mornings still lonely. But I no longer felt like a man begging for scraps. I felt like someone who had taken back control. Rachel's voice echoed in my heart. Promise me you'll keep living. And finally, I was keeping that promise. Michael tried reaching out once, mocking me in a message. I didn't reply. My silence was stronger than any words I could throw back. For once, he wasn't the center of my world. He never would be again. I realized the true victory wasn't revenge. It wasn't making them suffer. It was breaking free from the cage they had kept me in my whole life. I chose peace. I chose to live in a way that honored Rachel, not in the shadow of people who never valued me. And with that choice, I finally became free. One evening, months later, I visited Rachel's grave again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, and the world felt quiet. I knelt down and placed fresh flowers by her headstone. For the first time since she passed, I didn't feel only pain. I felt something different. Peace. I spoke softly, as if she could still hear me. Rachel, I kept my promise. I'm living. It's not easy, and it's not the same without you, but I'm living. The wind moved gently through the trees, and I closed my eyes, letting the silence wash over me. I thought about everything I had gone through. My parents' rejection, Michael's cruelty, the betrayal, the anger. All of it had tried to crush me, but I was still standing, stronger than before. I realized then that I didn't need revenge. I didn't need their approval. My strength wasn't in what they thought of me. It was in the love I shared with Rachel, in the life we built together, and in the way I was choosing to carry her memory forward. As I stood to leave, I looked at her name carved in stone. I smiled. A small but real smile. You'll never be forgotten. Not as long as I'm alive. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter. My parents had made their choice and I had made mine. They lost a son. Michael lost a brother. But I gained something they could never take away. Freedom, clarity, and the courage to move forward. And in that moment, I knew the truth. They might have turned their backs on me, but Rachel had given me the strength to finally stop turning mine on myself. I drove away, the sun dipping below the horizon, carrying not just grief, but hope. For the first time in a long time, I believed tomorrow could be better.